I am so excited about today's video. I am Molly and I am going to be sharing all about tips for your first 50-mile race. I leaned so heavily on other people's advice and tips, especially here on YouTube when it came to training for my first 50-mile ultra marathon, and so I wanted to share everything that I learned here in this video. So if you're new here, I'm Molly, like I just said. I am a running and lifestyle vlogger here in Austin, Texas, and last month I ran my first 50-mile ultra marathon, and it was my second ultra marathon. I ran it in Antelope Canyon and it was absolutely amazing, but it also did not go as I expected it to. And I feel like it's kind of hard when running a distance like that to kind of even have expectations in the first place. Like, I feel like my expectations were pretty low, but I also still had expectations. It's impossible to go into anything without having any expectations. So what happened out there was really not what I was expecting, because the weather was just so crazy. I have several videos recapping just my experience and just detailing my perspective from the 50-mile race. I have everything on like Instagram and TikTok, so I will link those videos below. But yeah, like I said, it definitely was not what I was expecting, but it was still amazing. I completed it. I'd run a handful of marathons before I ventured into trail running and ultra marathons themselves, and I really felt like there was just so much to learn and so much that I didn't know, which was why I really leaned, like I said, pretty heavily on YouTube and just other people's experience. And so I'm really excited just to share the things that I've learned along the way. I ran my first ultra marathon last fall and it was a 50K. It went amazing, and that was why I decided to leap into the new distance of a 50-mile race. And I felt like even the difference between the 50K and the 50-mile race were entirely different, and there was just so much unknown going into the 50-mile race. And so I want to share just some tangible tips for you heading into your 50-mile race that hopefully will be really helpful for you. My first tip is to use music wisely. So whether or not you have run half marathons, 5Ks, marathons, other ultras, I think a really big difference for me with the marathons and the ultra marathon distance is that for all of marathons, I was listening to music the entire time, and I realized with the ultra marathon distance that I needed to use music really wisely. And by that I mean I didn't listen to it for the first half of it, and when I started to feel like my motivation was starting to waver, or I was getting really bored, or I was starting to think like, oh my gosh, how am I gonna make it any longer? That was when I wanted to start to use music. And so I could really use music as a boost and use it as a boost of energy versus just relying on music the entire time. Because when you're running for 10 plus hours, music wouldn't be doing anything for you if you were listening to music for the entire time. And so instead, use music really strategically when you are out there. So whether you were using an on and off strategy or only optimizing music in the latter half of the race, I feel like is the best strategy for ultra marathons. And that also served me really well for the 50-mile race. I didn't turn my music on until about the marathon point, and at that point I was still doing pretty well, but I was also like, okay, I feel like I need a little boost and like something more than just like food. I need something like mentally to help me. And so I turned on my playlist and I was like, yes, okay, like this is exactly what I needed. And so I think when you are training, if you can train without music for a little bit and really be able to get your mind there so that you can run some of the race without music too, it will really help you a lot to be able to run the first half or however long you want to go without music, and then turn music on at a certain point. I think that will help you so much more than you even realize. Tip number 2 is to not overpack your vest. That is something that I knew I was going to do, and I actually never tried on my vest until race morning, which I should have realized that I needed to try it on, because as I was like packing it, I made videos beforehand of like what I was packing it with. I should have realized that it was going to be way too heavy. So morning of, I had everything packed up and I filled up my like hydration vest and I put it on, and it was so heavy. I was like, oh my gosh, like it was at least 5 pounds, and I should have realized then that I needed to switch things around, move things around, and have more like with my crew, and I didn't. And I think, not to say like that hurt me, but I will definitely not be doing that again. So with that, I would say if you have crew, utilize your crew. Load them up with stuff, load them up with your fuel, load them up with water, like anything, or utilize your drop bags more and pack more in your drop bags. I was just so worried about like needing so many things along the course that I was like, I need to have everything with me. So I like way overpacked on fuel with me, packed like so many like medication things that like in case of an emergency I would have needed them, and so I'm glad I had all those with me. But I think I way overpacked on both like my water and my fuel. I had so much water with me. Make sure you are not overpacking, or else you're gonna be like me and you're going to have a really heavy hydration vest with you, and that is just a lot of extra load that makes the race that much harder. Number 3 is to over prepare your crew or your drop bags, because anything can happen. So if you watch any of my highlights or recaps, you will know that there ended up being really unexpected weather, and I was not prepared for that. The weather said that it would be in the 50s and sunny. I think there was maybe like a 5 or 10% chance of rain, and I saw 10% and was like, okay, it's not gonna rain. That did not happen. It was an absolute downpour, and it was freezing. It was close to the like mid to low 30s, and I was so cold, and I didn't have anything, and I didn't have anything with my crew, my husband, because I just wasn't expecting that. And going back, I should have looked at the weather forecast, and whether or not there was rain in it or not, I should have been prepared for rain to happen just in case, because I don't ever want what happened out there to happen again. I had a pair of gloves, but they got soaked within minutes, so they weren't doing anything for me, so I took them off. So my hands were numb within like an hour of running in the rain, and I still had, I think, like 4 or 5 more hours to run in the rain. So at the end, I was just shivering, so cold, and my hands weren't functioning because they were so numb. I literally couldn't even get my headlamp to work because my hands were so numb that I couldn't like turn on the right functions. I also didn't have a rain jacket because, again, I didn't realize it was going to rain, and I didn't have on the right gear because I didn't know it was gonna rain. So had I looked into that and just prepared for the worst, then a lot of those things could have been avoided. I would say regardless of the weather, just prepare for some extreme situations, whether that is rain or extreme heat or anything like that. Just be prepared for the worst and have things in case of those situations. Number 4 would be to know the course, know the terrain, know the elevation, and know when those certain points are going to be happening, so you're not caught off guard and your mental game can still be really strong throughout them. So if you are running a course with a lot of elevation gain or a lot of like extreme elevation at certain points, I would make sure you know when those are happening. So if there's like a really big mountain to climb at mile 18, make sure you know that, because if you don't know that and then at mile 18 you realize you have like a 4 miles steep incline to come, it might really throw you off, and you might start to speak like really negatively to yourself, and that might just throw you off for the rest of the race, because that hasn't happened to me, but I know that it's happened to other people, and you're just off for the entire rest of the race because you weren't expecting that hill to be coming at mile 18. It's really important to know what you're getting yourself into and know how you need to mentally be preparing for it. Of course, it's important to know when you sign up, what's the elevation gain? Is that something you can be training for? What's the terrain, and is that also something you could be training for? This past ultra, I did not do the best of that. I can admit, I knew there was sand, but I did not realize there was as much sand as there was. I thought there were 5 miles of sand at the beginning. That was what I read in someone's review, and I took that to be the truth. I didn't do as much research as I needed to, and little did I know that the first 20 miles were sand. And so I had to really fixate on my mental game and just really focusing, because at mile 13, when I was so tired of running in the sand and I realized it was still going and there was literally no signs of the sand changing to a different type of terrain, I was like, okay, Molly, this is it. You're in it. You're not stopping. Like, keep going. But I think had I known that that was the terrain, I would have been able to enter into it with a different mindset. It is so important to know the details of the course that you are running, both so you can train properly and so that you can make sure that you are in the right mindset. Tip number 5 is to practice your fueling strategy. Fueling for ultramarathons is unlike anything else I've ever experienced. It is so different than fueling for marathons. Most people, when they run an ultramarathon, are eating actual food. They're not only relying on the gels or the chews that you mostly see people eating during marathons. So during training for the ultras, I started to eat PB&Js during my runs. I started to try like potato chips. I looked into what was going to be along the actual course so that I could try it beforehand. I have I mean, I have a fair amount of like GI issues when I run, and so I wanted to make sure that anything I ate during the course wouldn't just completely set me off. And so I made sure to do my research, and they don't give specifics of everything that's along the course. Your race might. So definitely see what is going to be provided at all the aid stations, and do your best to try a lot of it that you can along your training runs. I also tried several different like candies while I was training, because most aid stations will have different candies. They'll have like Swedish Fish, they'll have M&Ms, they'll have like Sour Patch Kids, they'll have lots of different candies. So I also tried those during my training runs. So yeah, just make sure you are practicing your fueling strategies. And I didn't do this, but I know a lot of people that will actually write out their specific strategy for race day in their notes on their phone, because once you are out there, it gets really hard to stick to it, just because your mind, like there's just so much to be thinking about on race day, and you have to be eating so much while you're out there. And so if you're worried about sticking to your fueling strategy, I know a lot of people that will write in their notes and just make sure every single hour that you are sticking to what you are planning to stick to, because if you are thrown off by your fueling plan, it can be really hard to get back on track with it. And if at like mile 30 you are way off on calories, you might end up bonking or something like that. Tip number 7 is to not get caught up in your pace or your time. Running ultras, again, is just so different from marathons, and I feel like the atmosphere of marathons, everyone is really focused on their time, they're trying to get a certain time, they care a lot about their pace, and that is so opposite from ultra marathons, at least from my experience. I really didn't meet anyone that cared about their time out there. All they cared about was completing the race and finishing it. They were just so excited to be outside, be experiencing a really cool race and a really beautiful nature. And we're just so excited to be around other runners and like getting to meet other runners. No one cares about time. And I think a really big reason for that too is that there's so much more elevation in the ultra marathons than there are in typical road races. Obviously there are road races and marathons that have a lot of elevation, but even races I've talked to, like people who have done like Boston or New York, it's like the elevation of those is around 1,000 feet, and I'm like, oh, all my ultras have been like more than 5,000 feet. So they're just really different. And when there's that much elevation on top of running on the trails, which slows you down already, people just really don't care about their time. And so if you are someone who is used to running other races where you really care about your time, it can be really hard just to stop focusing on that and fixating on that. But I promise you will have so much more of an enjoyable time if you are not caring about that and you are just excited to be out there and enjoying what ultras are, which is just a good time outside and getting to run. There are also a lot of things that can happen on race day that are completely out of your control that might slow you down. And so I feel like if you are out there really fixated on your time, and then come race day, you are stuck at the back and there's a really big, what word am I thinking of? There's just like a traffic jam of people. That's not the word I'm trying to think of, but if there's like a traffic jam of people, which happened to me multiple times, like I was literally like stuck and couldn't move, or there's so many people and y'all can't even run and you just have to walk for a bit, like all that happened countless times in the race. You might find yourself being really frustrated because you were trying to get a time, and it's like, it's so not worth getting frustrated over. Like again, just enjoy the fact that you are out there. Those are some of my main tips when it comes to running your first 50-mile race. Obviously there are so many more things that factor into running a race like that. So let me know if you have any other questions or any other videos I can make on this topic. I have run one and am hoping to do many more in my future. So we'll see what I end up training for next. But I hope this was helpful for you, and I'm so excited for you if you are about to run one or you're thinking about one. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made to embark on that journey of training for one and running one. So I highly recommend that distance. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.